The dust of redemption hung thick and golden in the air of the sheriff's office, illuminated by the slanting afternoon sun. It danced around the worn leather of saddles, the gleaming brass of a rifle rack, and the scuffed boots of Sheriff Jack O'Malley. He was a man shaped by hard living and a soft, weary smile, his weathered face etched with 1,000 stories of the frontier's cruel justice. Across from him stood Noah, a name as simple and unassuming as the man himself, but one that had echoed from Texas to the territories. At barely 23, he was no giant, his frame wiry and deceptive, his face a canvas of sharp lines and sun-kissed youth, but his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held an old kind of wisdom, honed by countless days and nights spent tracking the darkest dregs of humanity. Just 2 days prior, he had ridden into town with Jebediah, the vulture thorn slung over his horse, a name that had a bounty so high it could buy a small ranch. The vulture, now a quiet, sullen lump behind bars, was the reason for this moment. Sheriff O'Malley leaned back in his creaky wooden chair, his smile widening. "Noah," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble, "you've done a great service to this town, and to every decent soul from here to the Rio Grande. That bounty on the vulture, well, it's the biggest damn thing I've seen in a decade. We've got the reward money right here for you. A full $1,000 in gold." He gestured with a calloused hand toward a heavy burlap sack on his desk. The clinking sound of coins within was a siren's song. It was a fortune that could buy a man his own land, a comfortable life away from the grit and danger. A man like Noah, who had known nothing but the hard path, could finally hang up his spurs. Noah's gaze was fixed on the sack, but his mind was elsewhere. He had dreamed of this moment, of the freedom that kind of wealth represented. He could almost feel the weight of a deed to a small plot of land in his hand, the promise of quiet, peaceful mornings. But then the sheriff's smile took on a peculiar glint. "But you know, son," he continued, leaning forward, "there's a little complication. The Vulture's gang was not only a band of thieves and murderers, they were also kidnappers. And their last victim, well, she was found in the same hideout you raided. No family to speak of, as far as we can tell. Just her." He pushed himself up, walking around the desk to a side room, and with a flourish, he opened the door. The sight that met Noah's eyes was one he would never forget. Standing in the dim light was a woman, her head bowed. She was dressed in the plain, dark clothing of the Amish, a simple cap covering her hair. But what was most striking was her size. She was not merely stout. She was immense, her frame so large that her clothes strained against her. Her face, when she slowly lifted it, was a portrait of quiet dignity, but her eyes held a profound sadness and an almost unbearable exhaustion. She seemed a world away from the violence and lawlessness of the West, a lost, bewildered lamb in a land of wolves. The sheriff's low chuckle broke the silence. "This here is Sarah. The Vulture's boys kidnapped her for a reason we haven't yet figured out. They were heading south with her. Now, she's not a lot of use to anyone, truth be told. No family to ransom, and the Amish don't have much to their name. But she's a person, and she needs a place to go. So here's my offer, Noah. For your bravery, you can choose your reward. You can take this bag of gold, a life of comfort and freedom, or you can take Sarah. We'll give you a week's worth of supplies and 2 horses to see her to safety. It's a fool's choice, I know, but you're a man of principle. The law says she's your responsibility, in a sense, as the one who rescued her. But I'll give you a way out. The choice is yours." A murmur went through the small crowd that had gathered at the front window, drawn by the commotion. A few snickers, a few bewildered shakes of the head. Everyone expected him to take the gold. The choice was obvious. The sensible choice. The sane choice. $1,000 could change a man's life. An obese Amish woman was a burden, a liability, a slow-moving target in a harsh world. She couldn't ride fast, she couldn't defend herself, and she knew nothing of the dangers of the trail. Noah looked from the bag of gold to the woman. The gold was a promise of an easy life. Sarah was a promise of hardship, of responsibility, of a journey fraught with unknown dangers. The sheriff's words echoed in his mind. "For your bravery, choose your reward." And in that moment, Noah realized that bravery wasn't about catching a ruthless killer. It was about facing a different kind of challenge, a challenge that didn't come with a reward poster or a bounty, a challenge that was born of a simple moral imperative. To walk away with the gold would be to leave an innocent woman to fend for herself in a world that would chew her up and spit her out. To choose her was to accept a burden he had no obligation to carry. His gaze returned to Sarah. She hadn't moved, her head still slightly bowed, her immense frame a stoic monument to her helplessness. He saw the genuine fear in her eyes, the quiet despair. He thought of all the times he'd seen the greed and selfishness of men on the trail, the way they'd step over anyone to get what they wanted. And in this moment he felt a strange, inexplicable kinship with this lost soul. He had chosen the hard path his whole life. Why stop now? A slow, deliberate breath filled his lungs. The dust settled around them. "Sheriff," Noah said, his voice cutting through the silence, "I'll take the woman." A collective gasp swept through the office. The sheriff's smile didn't falter. It merely shifted, becoming something softer, more understanding. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, shaking his head slightly. He looked at Noah with a newfound respect. A man of true conviction. "I'll get those horses and supplies ready for you. You're a good man, Noah. A damn good man." Noah simply nodded, his eyes never leaving Sarah. He didn't know why he had made this choice. It was impulsive, foolish, and entirely against his nature. But as she slowly raised her head and their eyes met, a flicker of something passed between them. Not gratitude, not yet. Just a raw shared understanding that their lives were now inexplicably linked, and the journey ahead would be far more difficult and perhaps far more rewarding than any bounty he had ever chased. The sun set on the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty street, and Noah knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he had just embarked on the most dangerous and transformative journey of his life. The journey began not with a bang, but with a palpable, unsettling silence. The two of them, Noah and Sarah, rode out of town on borrowed horses, the late afternoon sun at their backs. The air, thick with dust and the promise of a cold night, seemed to amplify the unspoken tension between them. Noah, his shoulders tense under his worn duster, led the way on a lean brown mare, his rifle sheathed but ready. He glanced back at Sarah, who rode a sturdy roan chosen specifically to handle her considerable weight. She rode with a simple, stoic grace, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if she were a statue. He'd never been on a trail with someone who wasn't either a partner in a manhunt or a shackled criminal. This was different. This was a burden he had chosen, a responsibility he still couldn't fully comprehend. He tried to break the silence. "My name's Noah," he said, his voice a little too loud in the open air. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, but didn't speak. He tried again. Where are you from? I mean, what's your community called?" He knew little of the Amish, only the stray stories he'd heard in saloons about their quiet, insular lives. Sarah's hands, clasped loosely on the reins, remained still. Finally she spoke, her voice a soft, gentle melody that was utterly at odds with the rugged landscape. "Lancaster County," she said, her accent a faint, musical lilt. "In Pennsylvania." Pennsylvania. It was a world away, a journey that would take weeks, maybe months. He hadn't thought about the logistics of it all when he made his choice. He'd been caught in a moment of reckless honor. Now the weight of that choice settled on him like a heavy blanket. "That's a long way," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The trail stretched out before them, a thin scar across the desolate prairie. The land was unforgiving, and the road ahead would test the very limits of his resolve. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, Noah decided they should make camp. He found a small, sheltered copse of trees near a dried-up creek bed. He dismounted, the creak of the leather a loud noise in the stillness. Sarah slid off her horse with a surprising amount of agility, her movements slow and deliberate. She unburdened the horse of its saddle and bag with practiced hands, her actions speaking of a life of hard work, not of helplessness. She moved with a quiet efficiency that he found both comforting and unnerving. He started a fire, the sparks flying into the deepening twilight. She, in turn, began to unpack the food the sheriff had given them. A small sack of beans, some salted pork, and a block of hard cheese. Neither of them spoke as they went about their tasks, a shared chore that became a silent, awkward dance. The silence was thick with questions he wanted to ask, but didn't dare. Why her? What made her a target for the Vulture's gang? Was she a witness to something? Or was there another reason entirely? Her very presence was a mystery and a source of danger that was yet to reveal itself. As the fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on their faces, he finally broke the quiet. "Look," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I'm not going to lie to you. This wasn't what I planned. I don't know why they took you or why they wanted to keep you. But they're not going to be happy that I took you instead of $1,000. The sheriff said they were heading south. They'll probably be coming this way soon. We need to be careful." She looked at him then, her eyes, dark and deep, holding his gaze. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The simplicity of her words held a profound weight. It was the first sign of genuine emotion he had seen from her, and it made the entire peculiar situation feel more real. He wasn't just escorting a burden, he was protecting a person, a woman with a past and a life that had been violently interrupted. They ate in silence, the taste of the bland food a testament to the simplicity of their existence on the trail. As the fire died down to embers, Noah took the first watch, his rifle across his lap. Sarah, without a word, spread out her bedroll a small distance away and lay down. He watched her for a while, her large form a dark silhouette against the dying firelight. He felt the weight of his decision again, the foolishness of it. But for the first time, a small flicker of something else took hold. Not regret, but a sense of purpose, a duty. His ears, trained by years on the trail, picked up a sound, a faint, distant sound of hooves. It was too far to be a direct threat, but too close to be dismissed as a stray animal. He strained his ears, his heart thumping a steady rhythm in his chest. It was the sound of riders. And they weren't traveling with the easy gait of a weary traveler. They were moving with a purpose, with a quiet urgency that was unsettling. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they were being followed. They had not been gone long enough for the Vulture's gang to be far behind, not if they had set out to track them the moment they knew what Noah had done. The peculiar choice he had made had now become a race for survival. He would not just be escorting a woman to safety, he would be running with her, with the shadows of his past and the dangers of her own nipping at their heels. He glanced at her sleeping form, and a fresh wave of concern washed over him. He had chosen her, and in doing so he had just painted a target on both their backs. The morning sun, a brutal disk of heat, was their only companion as they rode. The air was dry and thin, making every breath a small effort. The sense of being watched, of being hunted, had not left Noah. It was a phantom weight on his shoulders, a hum in the back of his mind that sharpened every sense. He rode with his head on a swivel, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, any wisp of smoke, anything that didn't belong. The night had passed without incident, but the sound of distant hooves still echoed in his memory. Their conversation from the previous night had been a brief, fragile bridge, but it had made a difference. Sarah seemed a little less withdrawn. As they rode, she surprised him by pointing out a small, almost invisible path that led toward a rocky outcropping. "There's a spring there," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the clop of the horses. He looked at her, his brow furrowed in question. "My father taught me to read the land, to know where the water is," she explained, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. He followed her lead, and to his astonishment she was right. Tucked away in a crevice, a tiny, almost hidden spring trickled water into a small, cool pool. They dismounted, and he let the horses drink their fill. Sarah knelt by the pool, cupping her hands and bringing the cool water to her lips. She seemed to be in her element here, connected to the earth in a way he, a man who had lived his life running and hiding, had never been. "Thank you," he said, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time in days. I would have missed it. She simply nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. It was a small, quiet victory, a moment of connection that transcended their strange circumstances. As they rested, a new kind of dialogue opened up between them. He told her about his life as a bounty hunter, the loneliness of the trail, the way the world seemed to shrink to the size of a wanted poster and a saddlebag. He didn't tell her about the moments of fear, the close calls, the faces of the men he'd brought in, but he told her enough for her to get a sense of the life he led. It's not for everyone, he finished, feeling the inadequacy of his words. She listened with a patient stillness, her large hands clasped in her lap. My life was simple, she said. We farmed, we cooked, we worked with our hands. We lived for God and for each other. The world outside, it was a place of temptation and sorrow. Her words were soft yet firm, a window into a life of faith and community he could barely imagine. And the Vultures gang? How did they find you? He asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Her expression clouded over. They didn't find me, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I was taken. From our home. It was late at night. They wanted something my father had. Her hands clenched in her lap. He refused to give it to them, so they took me instead. She didn't elaborate, and the sadness that filled her eyes was so profound that Noah didn't press her. He had a feeling that the something her father had was far more important than a few horses or some grain. It was the key to this entire twisted mess. After they watered the horses and refilled their canteens, they continued their journey. The afternoon sun beat down on them, relentless and unforgiving. They rode for another hour before Noah's keen eyes caught a flicker of something in the distance, a dust cloud thin but distinct, rising from a line of hills far behind them. His heart hammered in his chest. They were coming. It was a small party, judging by the size of the cloud, maybe 3 or 4 riders. But they were moving fast and they were on a direct path. He didn't need to say anything. Sarah, too, had seen it. Her body stiffened on her horse. They're coming for me, she said, her voice filled with a chilling certainty. We need to go faster. He shook his head. No, that's what they expect. We need to lose them. He steered his horse away from the main trail toward a rugged, rocky terrain that would be difficult for riders to navigate. He dismounted and began to lead his horse, gesturing for her to do the same. They won't expect us to go through there. The horses will have a hard time, but it's our best chance. She followed his lead without question, her trust in him a silent, weighty thing. The terrain was brutal, sharp rocks and steep inclines. The horses struggled, their hooves slipping on the loose shale. They moved slowly, painstakingly, the sun dipping toward the horizon once more. They were making little progress, and the dust cloud in the distance seemed to be getting closer. He cursed his choice, cursed the outlaws, and cursed the strange, quiet woman he was now responsible for. As darkness began to fall, they found a small, hidden cave, a perfect place to wait out the night. The air was cool and still. They tethered the horses and huddled together, the tense silence returning. They were trapped between a rock and a hard place. The outlaws were close, maybe only an hour or 2 behind them. They could be here by morning. The thought was a cold stone in Noah's stomach. He looked at Sarah, her face illuminated by the faint moonlight that seeped into the cave. Her expression was one of quiet resignation. They won't stop until they have me, she said, her voice a low murmur. They are ruthless men. My father, they hurt him. I had to go with them. She didn't say more, and Noah didn't ask. He understood now. She had chosen to go to save her father, a choice that was just as difficult and just as brave as his own. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were 2 people, bound together by choices of sacrifice, hiding in a small cave in the middle of nowhere, with danger looming outside. The sound of hooves closer now echoed in the stillness of the night, not a dust cloud, but the distinct, deliberate sounds of men riding. They were searching. They were methodical. They were close. Noah's hand instinctively went to his rifle. The moment had come. They would not be able to run for much longer. The quiet of the night was shattered by the rhythmic thud of hooves against the hard, packed earth. The sounds grew louder, closer, until Noah could feel the vibrations through the ground. He pressed himself further into the darkness of the cave, his rifle raised and ready. Sarah was a silent, still shadow beside him, her presence a heavy, warm weight. He could feel her breathing, slow and steady, a testament to a quiet courage that defied her appearance. The riders were a small group, maybe 3 or 4 men, just as he'd suspected. Their voices, low and guttural, carried on the wind. "Damn fool," a man's voice snarled, "choosing a fat woman over $1,000. Another man chuckled, a cruel, raspy sound. "Don't matter. The boss wants her back, and we're going to make that bounty hunter wish he never laid eyes on her." They stopped just outside the cave's entrance, their horses snorting and shifting. Noah's heart was a drum against his ribs. He counted them. 3 men. He was outnumbered. His best chance was to take the first one by surprise and hope the other 2 were slow on the draw. He tightened his grip on the rifle, his finger a hair's breadth from the trigger. "Check the rocks," the first voice commanded. "He's probably holed up somewhere close." Noah watched as a tall, lanky man dismounted, his silhouette a dark, menacing shape against the starlight. He carried a rifle and moved with a predatory grace. This was it. Noah took a deep breath, preparing to make his move. But before he could, Sarah moved. She didn't stand up, didn't make a sound. Instead, her hand reached out and touched his arm. He glanced at her, confused. Her eyes were wide, and in the dim light, he saw a peculiar determination. She leaned in, her voice a whisper that was almost swallowed by the night. "Don't. Not yet." He didn't understand, but he trusted her. He lowered the rifle just slightly, keeping his body rigid. The man on foot was getting closer, his boots crunching on the loose shale. Noah could see the outline of his face, a hard, cruel mask. He was a few yards from the cave entrance. Noah was about to ignore her and fire when Sarah suddenly did something completely unexpected. She let out a small, quiet grunt as if in pain. It was a sound so soft that it could have been the wind, but it was enough. The man stopped, his head cocked to the side. "What was that?" he whispered to his companions. "Probably a stray goat," one of the others said, his voice laced with annoyance. "Let's just look." But the first man, the leader, was more cautious. He moved slowly, his rifle raised. He was looking at the cave now. Noah's muscles tensed. The man was going to see them. He was going to expose them. A firefight was imminent, and he knew they would not survive it. Just then, Sarah did something else. With a swiftness that was shocking for a woman of her size, she picked up a small rock and threw it, not at the man, but at a cluster of loose rocks high above the cave entrance. The sound it made was an avalanche of clatter, the rocks raining down with a loud, chaotic noise. The man on foot froze, his eyes wide. His companions' horses, spooked by the noise, whinnied and bucked. "What the hell?" the leader of the group shouted. "It's a damn rock slide," the other man yelled, struggling to control his horse. The distraction, so simple and yet so effective, gave Noah a window. He raised his rifle and fired a single shot. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet hit the first man in the shoulder, sending him sprawling with a cry of pain. Noah didn't hesitate. He scrambled out of the cave, his pistol drawn. He fired again, aiming at the leader. The man's horse, already spooked, reared up, throwing him from the saddle. The third man, seeing his companions down, shouted a curse and spurred his horse into a full gallop, disappearing into the darkness. Noah stood over the first man, his rifle barrel still smoking. The man was clutching his shoulder, his face a mask of agony. "Where's the boss?" Noah demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The man just gritted his teeth, his eyes filled with hatred. Noah kicked the rifle out of his reach. The leader, his ankle twisted, was trying to get up. Noah put his boot on his chest, pinning him to the ground. "Who sent you?" he asked again. "You'll never get to town," the man on the ground spat, blood trickling from his lips. "He'll find you. He'll find her. He always does." Noah looked at Sarah, who had emerged from the cave, her face pale but her eyes resolute. He realized she had not only saved his life with her quick thinking, but had also revealed a depth of cunning he never would have expected. Her knowledge of the land, her understanding of how to use its elements to her advantage, was an unexpected and powerful weapon. She was no damsel in distress. She was a partner, albeit a silent and reluctant one. He made the decision to leave the wounded men where they lay, stripping them of their weapons and horses. He had no time to deal with them, no time to get them to a doctor. They would have to fend for themselves, a taste of the same cruel justice they dealt to others. He and Sarah rode off under the starlit sky, the adrenaline coursing through him. The ambush had been averted, but it was only the first skirmish in a much larger war. He finally understood the weight of what she had told him. These men were ruthless, and they would not stop. He looked at her, riding with her head held high, and felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, respect, and a dawning admiration for the woman he had chosen, a woman whose true strength was only just beginning to reveal itself. The remnants of the ambush were left behind, a morbid tableau of scattered weapons and groaning men. Noah and Sarah rode for hours through the dead of night, the silence of the desert swallowing the sounds of their horses' hooves. The adrenaline that had fueled their escape began to wane, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. He felt a dull ache in his jaw from clenching it so hard, and a tremor in his hands. Sarah, too, seemed to feel the weight of what had just transpired. Her posture, while still dignified, seemed to droop with the strain of the night's events. As the first sliver of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and pale pink, Noah saw a place to rest, a small, dry canyon with a narrow, hidden entrance. They rode their weary horses inside, the air growing cool and still. They found a small overhang, a makeshift shelter from the coming day's heat. He dismounted, his legs wobbly, and helped Sarah down. She didn't speak, but her hands, as she unburdened her horse, were trembling. The shared experience, the violence and the fear, had left a deep emotional scar on both of them. He tended to the horses, checking for any injuries, then turned his attention to her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and rough. She nodded, but her eyes, meeting his, were filled with a profound sadness. I have never seen such a thing," she said, her voice a whisper. "Violence. It is a sin." The weight of her Amish upbringing, the pacifism ingrained in her, was a stark contrast to the brutal reality they now faced. He felt a strange pang of guilt, as if he had somehow sullied her with the blood of the men he had left behind. "It was them or us," he said, his voice flat. "You did a brave thing, Sarah. You saved us. You saved me." He looked at her, his respect now a tangible thing. He saw not a heavy-set woman from a strange community, but a person of remarkable resilience and quiet intelligence. She shook her head, as if dismissing his words. It was not bravery. It was a moment of quick thinking, a moment of fear. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, taking a small canteen from her bag. She didn't offer him water, but instead, with a sigh, began to clean the scrapes on her hands from the rough ride through the canyon. He watched her, a knot of concern in his chest. "You said they wanted something my father had," he said, the words coming out more like a command than a question. "What was it?" He knew he was pressing her, but he also knew they couldn't afford to be ignorant. They were in too deep now. Sarah hesitated, her hands still. She looked at him, and he saw a flash of fear in her eyes. It was not the fear of the physical danger they had just faced, but a deeper, more personal kind of fear. The fear of a secret being revealed. "I can't," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I promised my father I would not speak of it." "Sarah, we're not going to make it if I don't know what we're up against," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "The man I shot, he said they won't stop. That the boss wants you back. There's more to this than a simple kidnapping, isn't there?" She took a deep breath, and the dam finally broke. The words came out in a torrent of soft, halting sentences. It's a ledger, a journal. My father, he keeps records of the travelers who pass through our land, of their comings and goings. One of the men, a man named Sterling, he came to us years ago. He was a fugitive. My father gave him sanctuary. He worked with us for a while. He seemed like a changed man. But then he left in the middle of the night. My father had written about him in his journal, about his past, about the things he said he did. He made a record of his sins, as he called them. He believed that all of God's children, even the broken ones, deserved a record of their existence. It was a book of forgiveness and remembrance. Noah's mind raced. A ledger, a journal. Not a map to gold, not a treasure, but a record of a man's past. And this man, Sterling, he came back for it? Yes, Sarah whispered, her eyes filling with tears. He is the leader of the gang. He is a cruel man. He wants the ledger because it contains a record of his past crimes, crimes he thought were buried forever. He wants to destroy it, to erase the truth. My father refused to give it to him, so he took me. He thought that if he took me, my father would give him the journal. But my father, he gave me the journal before they took me. She reached into a hidden pocket of her dress and with a trembling hand pulled out a small worn leather book. It was unremarkable, unassuming, just a simple journal. The entire reason for this hellish journey, for the danger they were in, was a book. The irony was almost unbearable. He felt a new wave of respect for her father, for his courage in the face of such evil, and a new, fierce determination to protect this woman and this book. He looked at the journal, then at her. He's not just a man, Noah said, his voice low and dangerous. He's a ghost. He wants to disappear. This book, it's his only witness. He won't stop until he has it. I know, she said, her tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was afraid you would leave me, that you would take the book and leave me to my fate. He reached out, and with a tenderness that surprised even himself, put his hand on her shoulder. I chose you, Sarah. And now I understand why. You're worth more than $1,000 in gold. You're worth more than a dozen of those men. We'll get through this. Together. He didn't know if he believed his own words, but he knew he had to say them. The bond between them had shifted. It was no longer a matter of duty or honor, but a true alliance, forged in the crucible of fear and shared purpose. They had a new enemy now, a man who would stop at nothing to erase his past. And they, a young bounty hunter and an Amish woman with a book, were the only things standing in his way. The sun was high in the sky when they finally saw the faint outline of a town. It was a welcome sight, a beacon of civilization in a vast and dangerous wilderness. The town, named Redemption Creek, was small and dusty, a collection of ramshackle wooden buildings clustered around a single saloon and a general store. A few horses were tethered to the hitching posts, and a handful of weary-looking men sat on the porch, spitting tobacco and watching the world go by. Noah felt a sense of relief wash over him, a moment to rest, to get supplies, to find out more about this man, Sterling. He rode in with Sarah at his side. As they dismounted, the men on the porch stopped talking, their eyes widening at the sight of them. A bounty hunter, with his rough-hewn clothes and gun on his hip, and a large Amish woman in her plain dress and bonnet. The pairing was so bizarre, so completely out of place, that it immediately drew a crowd. A few of the men chuckled, a low, derisive sound that made Noah's blood run cold. Well now, one of the men drawled, his voice thick with ridicule. Look what the cat dragged in. A bounty hunter with a prize more peculiar than any I've ever seen. Noah ignored him, his face a mask of stone. He helped Sarah down from her horse, his actions deliberate and gentle. He felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness toward her, a need to shield her from the cruelty of these men's words. He led her toward the general store, but the men on the porch followed them, their taunts growing bolder. What's her bounty on, son? Must be worth a fortune to haul that much cargo. Sarah's head was bowed, her shoulders hunched. The mockery, so casual and so cruel, was a familiar sting for her. She had endured it for a lifetime, from children who stared to adults who whispered. But here, in the lawless West, it felt sharper, more dangerous. Noah had had enough. He stopped and turned, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. His gaze, cold and hard as steel, swept over the men. "She's with me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And I suggest you find something better to do with your time than disrespect a lady." The men fell silent, his demeanor and the subtle threat in his voice a clear warning. They knew a man who lived by the gun when they saw one. They backed down, but the smirks on their faces remained. Noah took Sarah's arm and led her into the store. Inside, the storekeeper, a portly man with a kind face, looked at them with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. "Never seen a sight like you two," he said, not with mockery, but with a genuine sense of wonder. "What can I get for you?" Noah bought a sack of flour, some dried beef, coffee, and a few more bullets. He also bought some fabric and needles for Sarah. He had no doubt she would know how to use them. As he paid, he asked the storekeeper, his voice dropping to a low tone, "You know a man named Sterling? Goes by a few other names, maybe?" The storekeeper's eyes narrowed. "Sterling? Can't say as I do. What's he look like?" Noah described him, and the storekeeper shook his head. "Doesn't ring a bell, but there's a lot of strangers passing through these days. Outlaws mostly looking to stay off the trail. You in trouble with the law, son?" "No," Noah said, his gaze unwavering. "We're not. Just looking for a man who took something that belongs to us." The storekeeper seemed to accept his answer, but his gaze lingered on Sarah. As they left the store, a man stepped out of the saloon, a tall, well-dressed man with a refined air that was completely out of place in this dusty town. He was a gambler, judging by his clothes, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, fell on Sarah. He didn't mock her. Instead, his eyes seemed to be measuring her, taking her in with an unsettling intensity. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to one of the men on the porch, a silent communication that sent a jolt of alarm through Noah. They were being watched, and the man in the suit. He was no ordinary traveler. Noah pulled Sarah along, his pace quickening. They had to get out of this town. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap. He had a bad feeling about the man in the suit, his composure, his piercing gaze, his silent communication with the locals. He was too deliberate, too organized. He was a snake in the grass, and Noah had a sickening feeling that he was connected to Sterling. As they reached their horses, Noah heard the man in the suit speak to the men on the porch, his voice low and commanding. "I want to know everything about them," he said. "Where they came from, where they're going, everything." The words were a confirmation of Noah's fears. They had been found. The news of his peculiar choice had spread. The bounty on Sarah was not just her life, it was the contents of the book she carried, the sins of a man who was now a ghost. The threat was not just from a gang of outlaws, but from an organized, ruthless network that had eyes and ears everywhere. Noah and Sarah were not just on the run, they were being hunted. And they had just walked right into the lion's den. The air in Redemption Creek, once a source of hope, now felt thick with suspicion and impending doom. The man in the suit, who Noah instinctively recognized as a higher-ranking member of Sterling's network, was not a brute like the men they had faced on the trail. He was a strategist, a hunter with patience and a clear objective. Noah knew they had to move, and fast. He didn't bother with farewells or explanations. He simply mounted his horse, helped Sarah onto hers, and spurred them both into a gallop, leaving the surprised townspeople staring after them. They rode for miles, not stopping until the sun was a low, smoldering ember on the horizon. They were far from the town now, but the feeling of being watched, of being pursued, was stronger than ever. They made camp in a hidden, rocky crevice, a place where they hoped the horses' tracks would be lost in the hard, unforgiving ground. The silence that fell between them was heavier than before, laden with the knowledge of their precarious situation. "He knows who we are," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "He knows what I have." Her hands, still trembling, clutched the small leather journal in her lap. "How could he know?" Noah asked, his frustration a raw, bitter taste in his mouth. "The sheriff was discreet. Nobody knew who you were." Sarah shook her head, her eyes filled with a dawning horror. "You don't understand the Amish community. We are not like the people you know. There are whispers, stories. The leader of that gang, Sterling, he was once a part of our community. His name was Jacob. He was cast out. But he has his own ways of finding things out, his own network." Noah's heart sank. This wasn't just a random gang of outlaws. This was a man with a past that was intertwined with Sarah's own, a man who had a personal, vengeful reason for wanting the journal. He had not just described a leader. He had described a man with a network, with spies, with a reach that extended even into the most remote and isolated communities. He was a ghost in the shadows, and his ghost was now haunting their every step. "You knew him?" Noah asked, the question hanging in the air. She nodded slowly. "Jacob. He was a good man once. He was strong, but he had a wildness in him, a darkness. My father tried to help him, to guide him, but he wouldn't listen. He left, and when he did, my father wrote about it in his journal. He wrote about the hope he had for him and the sorrow he felt for the path he had chosen. Sterling wants to destroy that hope. He wants to destroy the witness to his brokenness." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It wasn't about money or power. It was about a man trying to erase his own past, to kill the last living memory of a life he had once hoped for. He was a man consumed by his own sins, and he would stop at nothing to hide them. As they spoke, a rider shrouded in the deepening twilight emerged from the rocks. He was a lone figure, a silent sentinel on the ridge above them. Noah's hand went to his pistol, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm, but the man didn't come closer. He simply sat on his horse, watching them, a silent, menacing presence. Then he raised his hand and waved, a small, chilling wave, a signal, and with that he was gone, disappearing into the darkness. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "A scout," Noah said, his voice grim. "He found us. He's telling them where we are. They're coming." The full weight of their situation settled on him. He had underestimated Sterling. He had thought he was just another outlaw, but he was a man driven by a profound personal need to hide his past. And he had a network of men, like the one they had just seen, who were not just bounty hunters but assassins. He looked at Sarah, at the small leather journal in her hands. The entire world for this man had shrunk to the size of this book, and they were the only ones standing in his way. "We can't outrun them," Noah said, his voice filled with a desperate certainty. "Not with them tracking us like this. We have to change the game. We have to stop running and start fighting." Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide with fear and a new kind of resolve. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady now. "What is our plan?" He didn't have one, not a real one. He had only a gut feeling, a desperate need to face this ghost of a man and end this nightmare. "I don't know," he said, the admission a humbling moment, "but we can't go back. We can't go to another town. We'll be hunted every step of the way." They were two souls, lost in a wilderness with a past they were trying to outrun, and a future that seemed to offer nothing but danger. The scout on the ridge had been a chilling reminder of their vulnerability. The man in the suit in town had been a sign of their true enemy. And the man from her past, a ghost named Jacob, was a testament to the fact that you can never truly outrun your sins. Their journey was not just a physical one. It was a race against time, a battle against a man's need to erase his past, and a fight for their very survival. The night was their only ally now. Noah and Sarah rode without stopping, their pace a steady, grueling trot. The horses, weary from the constant travel, stumbled occasionally, but Noah didn't dare slow down. The image of the scout on the ridge was seared into his mind, a silent promise of the pursuit to come. They were no longer simply traveling, they were on the run, a desperate flight from an unseen enemy who knew the land and knew them. The terrain grew more brutal as they left the prairie behind and entered a rugged, mountainous region. The air grew thin and cold, and the path became a treacherous, winding climb. Noah, a master of the trail, led the way, his instincts his only guide. He navigated through a labyrinth of canyons and rocky outcrops, hoping to lose their pursuers in the unforgiving landscape. Sarah, for her part, rode with a quiet fortitude that continued to astonish him. She was no rider, but she held on with a grim determination, her large frame a testament to her unyielding spirit. As they rode, the physical exhaustion began to set in, but the mental exhaustion was a heavier burden. They were both running on sheer adrenaline and a desperate need to survive. There was little talk between them. The occasional whispered word to point out a landmark or a turn was all that passed between them. The silence, once awkward, was now a shared space of fear and understanding. At one point, They had to cross a narrow, fast-flowing river. The horses, spooked by the cold water, balked. Noah, his own hands shaking with exhaustion, had to calm them, leading his horse through the churning water with a firm, steady hand. Sarah followed, her face a mask of concentration. The river was a small victory, a small obstacle overcome. But it was just one of many, and they both knew it. They found a small, sheltered cave on the other side, a place to rest for a few precious hours. The moon, a pale sliver in the sky, provided the only light. Noah slid off his horse, his legs giving way, and he fell to his knees. The exhaustion, the fear, the sheer weight of his decision crashed down on him. He sat there, his head in his hands, the cold reality of their situation a suffocating blanket. He had made a foolish choice, a heroic choice, but one that was now going to get them both killed. Sarah dismounted and came to him, her movements slow and deliberate. She knelt beside him, her presence a silent comfort. She didn't say anything, didn't offer any empty words of reassurance. Instead, she took his hand in hers. Her hands, large and soft, were a stark contrast to his calloused, scarred ones. She simply held it, her touch a grounding presence in the chaos. "I am so sorry, Noah," she whispered, her voice filled with a genuine sorrow. "I am sorry for all of this. I should have told you." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate vulnerability. "It's not your fault, Sarah," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I made the choice. I chose to save you. I don't regret that. But I didn't know it would be like this. I didn't know he was a ghost with an army." She tightened her grip on his hand. "He is not an army, Noah. He is a broken man. He is a man who is afraid. And fear. Fear makes men do terrible things. But it also makes them weak. He is not as strong as he seems. We have something he doesn't have. We have each other." Her words, so simple and yet so profound, hit him with the force of a physical blow. They had each other, a strange alliance of a bounty hunter and an Amish woman, bound together by a foolish choice and a book of sins. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a burden, but a partner. She was a woman of faith and resilience, a rock in the storm. She had not only survived this ordeal, she was helping him to survive it too. He took a deep breath, the cold night air filling his lungs. "We can't keep running," he said, his voice now steady and resolute. "They know the territory. They have a network. They'll find us. We have to make a stand." She nodded, her expression unwavering. "Where?" He looked around the desolate, rocky terrain. They were surrounded by jagged cliffs and deep ravines. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we have to find a place where we have the advantage, a place where we can turn the tables on them." The idea was audacious, foolish even, to stop running and face a man who was an expert in hunting, but it was also their only hope. They couldn't outrun a ghost. They had to confront him. The sun would rise soon, and with it the hunters would come. They had only a few precious hours to find their sanctuary, their battlefield. Their journey, once a desperate flight, was now a deliberate march toward a final defining confrontation. Their survival, and the fate of the secret Sarah carried, depended on it. The dawn broke with a cold, unforgiving light, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. Noah and Sarah had been riding for an hour, their bodies aching and their minds running on fumes. They were searching for a place to make their stand, a place where the terrain would be their ally and they could turn the tables on their pursuers. The air was thin and the wind bit at their faces, but they pressed on, a shared purpose their only fuel. It was Sarah who saw it first, a thin wisp of smoke rising from a narrow ravine that was almost invisible from the trail. She pointed it out, her eyes gleaming with a mix of exhaustion and hope. "Smoke," she said, her voice a rough whisper. "Someone is there." Noah was hesitant. A lone settlement could be a trap, a hiding place for outlaws, or a dangerous place where they would be exposed. But they had no other choice. They were running out of options. With a nod, he steered his horse toward the ravine, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. They rode down the steep, rocky path, the scent of wood smoke growing stronger with every step. The ravine opened up into a small, secluded valley, a hidden oasis in the unforgiving mountains. At the center of the valley was a small, ramshackle cabin, built from rough-hewn logs. A wisp of smoke curled from its stone chimney, and a small, fenced-in area held a few chickens and a goat. It was a picture of quiet, simple life, a stark contrast to the violence and danger they had been facing. An old man with a long white beard sat on the porch, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as they approached, his eyes, blue as a summer sky, fixed on them with a calm, piercing gaze. Noah dismounted, his body stiff with fatigue. He helped Sarah down, her legs trembling from the long ride. The old man didn't speak. He simply watched them, his expression one of profound stillness. We're in trouble, Noah said, the words a raw confession. We're being hunted. We need a place to rest. The old man nodded slowly. I can see that, he said, his voice a gentle rumble, like stones rolling down a riverbed. I am Elias. This is my home. You are welcome here. Come in. The fire is warm. He didn't ask who they were or what they had done. He simply offered them sanctuary. They tethered their horses and followed him into the cabin. The inside was small but neat, filled with the comforting smells of wood smoke and a simmering stew. A pot sat on a small fireplace, and a bedroll was laid out in a corner. It was a space of peace, a promise of safety they had not felt in days. Sarah, with a sigh of relief, sank onto a small stool near the fire. Noah, his muscles screaming in protest, sat on the floor leaning against a wall, his rifle still in his lap. He didn't relax, not fully. The image of the scout on the ridge was still too fresh in his mind. Eat, Elias said, handing them each a bowl of stew. It was simple, but it was the most delicious thing they had ever tasted. As they ate, he spoke. This place is a sanctuary for lost souls. I came here many years ago, seeking refuge from the world. The world is a place of noise and pain. Here, there is only peace. You are safe here for a little while. His words, so simple and yet so meaningful, were a balm to their weary souls. They were not just a random man and woman, they were lost souls. And this old man with his quiet wisdom had seen that. He tended to their wounds, physical and emotional, without judgment. He made them feel human again, not just targets in a desperate hunt. As the night wore on, Noah finally allowed himself to sleep, his rifle still in his hands. He slept fitfully, his dreams filled with the faces of the men he had faced, the sound of hooves, and the image of the scout on the ridge. He woke with a start, the sun a pale presence on the horizon. He looked around the cabin. Elias was up tending to the fire. Sarah was still sleeping, her face a picture of serene peace. For a few precious hours, they had been safe. He knew it couldn't last. They had to leave. They had to continue their journey. But where? He was no longer certain he could win a fight against Sterling's network. He was tired, and Sarah was not a fighter. He looked at the small leather journal on the table. The entire reason for this nightmare. He had a sudden, desperate urge to throw it into the fire, to destroy the evidence, to make them irrelevant. But he knew he couldn't. It was not his to destroy. It was a record of a man's sins, and a testament to his own peculiar brand of bravery. He went outside, the cold morning air hitting his face. Elias was already out, tending to the goat. "You will not be able to hide forever," Elias said, his voice as calm as a still lake. "He will find you. The man you speak of, he is a hunter. He is driven by a profound need to erase his own past. He will not rest until he has what he wants." "I know," Noah said, his voice heavy. "We have to leave. Thank you for your help." Elias turned to him, his blue eyes filled with a deep knowing. "You have a choice to make, young man," he said. "You can continue to run and you will die, or you can stand and face him. But you cannot do it alone. You need help. You need faith." Noah looked at him, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I have no one." Elias smiled a small, gentle smile. "You have her," he said, gesturing to the cabin. "And in that book, there is a truth that can save you. You must seek out those who believe in it, those who will stand with you against the darkness. You must find her people. They hold the key to all of this. The old man's words were a revelation. He had been running for days, trying to outsmart a hunter, but Elias had shown him a different path, a path of hope, of allies, of a fight that was not just about survival but about truth. He looked back at the cabin, at the woman who was a stranger but who had become his partner. Their journey was not over. It was just beginning, and they were no longer alone. The promise of sanctuary, however temporary, had been a necessary balm for their weary souls. But as dawn broke over Elias's small, secluded valley, a new kind of resolve settled over Noah and Sarah. They had to leave. They had to follow the old man's advice. Their journey was no longer a frantic escape, but a deliberate march toward a clear destination. They would seek out Sarah's people, the Amish community from which she came, and seek their help. This was a path neither of them had ever considered, a journey that would take them into a world completely alien to Noah and a place filled with deep, complex emotions for Sarah. They packed their few belongings in the pale morning light, the silence between them no longer a barrier, but a shared understanding of the weight of their decision. Elias watched them, a knowing look in his blue eyes. As Noah mounted his horse, he looked at the old man. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate for the debt he felt he owed. Elias simply nodded. "Go with God, young man. And remember, the truest strength is found not in a gun but in the courage to face what lies ahead with an open heart." His words were a final blessing, a last piece of wisdom to carry with them into the unknown. They rode out of the valley, leaving the peace behind and heading toward the unforgiving plains once more. The physical exhaustion had been temporarily assuaged by the brief rest, but the mental and emotional toll of the past few days was a heavier burden. Noah led the way, his instincts guiding them, but he was no longer a lone wolf. He glanced back at Sarah, who rode beside him with a quiet determination. He was no longer just a bounty hunter on a job. He was a protector on a mission, and his mission was to see her home. The journey was long and grueling. The landscape was vast and empty, a seemingly endless expanse of dry grass and rolling hills. The sun beat down on them relentlessly, and the wind, a constant dry companion, whipped at their clothes. They spoke little, their energy conserved for the long miles ahead. But in the quiet moments of the day, during a brief stop to rest the horses or share a meal of dried meat and hardtack, a different kind of conversation began to unfold. Noah, in a rare moment of vulnerability, spoke of his life as a bounty hunter. "It's a lonely life," he said, his voice low and a little rough. "You're always an outsider. People, they're glad you brought a bad man to justice, but they don't want you to stay. You're a reminder of the darkness. You're always on the road. You get used to it, the solitude. But it's a heavy thing to carry." Sarah listened with a patient stillness, her eyes fixed on his face. She didn't judge him. She simply listened, and when he was done, she spoke of her own life. "We are never alone," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Our community, we are always together. When we work together. When we eat together. We live by a simple rule: be in the world, but not of the world. It is our strength. It is our shield against the darkness you speak of." She told him about their values, of their devotion to God, of their commitment to non-violence. She spoke of the simple pleasures of life, the sound of a horse-drawn carriage on a dirt road, the taste of freshly baked bread, the comfort of a community that knows you and loves you. Her words painted a picture of a world that was so completely different from his, a world that was both alien and incredibly beautiful. He began to understand why the journal, a simple record of a man's journey, was so important to them. It was a testament to their faith, a record of a soul they had tried to save, a quiet witness to a life that had gone astray. They faced physical challenges too. They had to cross a river, its current swift and dangerous. Noah, a skilled horseman, went first, his horse plunging into the churning water with a nervous snort. He made it to the other side, his clothes soaked, then looked back at Sarah. She was hesitant, her face pale. He saw the fear in her eyes. "It's all right," he yelled over the sound of the water. "Just trust your horse, hold on tight." She took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and urged her horse forward. The horse, a sturdy roan, fought the current, but Sarah's quiet strength and her trust in the animal and in Noah saw her through. She made it to the other side, her body trembling, but with a look of triumph on her face. It was a small victory, but it was a meaningful one. It was a testament to the trust that was growing between them, a fragile but powerful bond that was being forged in the crucible of their shared journey. They were no longer two strangers on a peculiar mission. They were two allies, navigating a dangerous path with a shared purpose. As the days turned into a week, they began to see the signs of civilization, but not the kind Noah was used to. They saw no bustling towns, no saloons, no general stores. Instead, they saw neat, well-kept farms, fields of corn and wheat, and horse-drawn carriages on the dirt roads. The air seemed different here, cleaner, a little quieter. The land felt more cared for, more tended to. It was a world that seemed to be 1,000 miles away from the lawless, chaotic West. They had arrived. They were at the edge of Lancaster County, a place of peace and quiet, a world of faith and community. But as they looked at the simple, beautiful landscape, Noah felt a wave of apprehension. He was an outsider here, a man of violence and a gun. He was bringing danger to a people who lived a life of peace. He had a gun, a past filled with bloodshed, and a fugitive with an army on his trail. He had a feeling that his presence here would be seen not as a blessing, but as a curse. He looked at Sarah, her face filled with a mixture of hope and fear. This was her home, and he was about to bring the darkness of his world to her doorstep. The journey was not over. It had just begun. And the hardest test, the test of faith and belonging, was yet to come. The sight of the first Amish farm was a quiet yet profound shock to Noah's senses. It was a place of serene order, a stark contrast to the chaotic wild world he inhabited. The fields were meticulously tilled, the fences were neatly maintained, and the simple two-story farmhouse stood as a monument to a life of hard work and humility. A young boy in plain clothing and a straw hat was working in the garden, his movements slow and deliberate. When he saw them, he stopped and stared, his face a mixture of curiosity and a deep, ingrained wariness. Sarah's body seemed to relax. She took a deep breath, her face filled with a poignant mix of relief and trepidation. "We are home," she whispered, the words holding a weight that Noah could not comprehend. She urged her horse forward, and Noah, his hand still resting on his pistol, followed her. They approached the farmhouse, and a woman in a simple blue dress and a bonnet came out, her hands wiping on her apron. She was older, her face etched with a lifetime of sun and labor, but her eyes held a gentle kindness. She looked from Sarah to Noah, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Sarah," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and profound relief. She moved forward, her arms outstretched, and hugged Sarah, her body trembling with emotion. "Praise be to God," the woman said, her voice choked with tears. We thought you were lost to us." She looked at Noah, her gaze now filled with a deep, unsettling suspicion. She saw his gun, his boots, the dust of the trail on his clothes. He was a man of the world, a stranger, a source of danger in a place of peace. Sarah, with a gentle touch on her arm, introduced him. "This is Noah. He rescued me. He brought me home." The woman, whose name was Martha, nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on his pistol. She led them inside, and the small, simple cabin was a testament to their life. The furniture was plain and functional, the walls were bare, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and a quiet, unassuming sanctity. She fed them, her hands moving with a practiced grace as she laid out a simple meal of bread, cheese, and milk. Noah ate, his body finally able to rest, but his mind was on fire. He was an alien here. He could feel the distrust in the air, the silent questions that hung in the space between them. Martha's husband, a strong, silent man with a full beard and kind eyes, came in and nodded to them. He didn't say anything to Noah, but his gaze, when it fell on him, was filled with a polite but firm distance. He was a man of peace, and Noah was a man of violence. The two worlds could not coexist without a sense of deep, ingrained discomfort. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, a few other families from the community came to the house, drawn by the news of Sarah's return. They were all dressed in the same plain, dark clothes, their faces filled with a quiet joy at her safe return, and a deep, unsettling suspicion of the stranger with her. Whispers in their Pennsylvania Dutch language filled the air. Noah didn't understand the words, but he understood the sentiment. They were asking questions about him, about why he was here, about the gun he carried, about the danger he represented. Sarah, her face filled with a mixture of sadness and frustration, tried to explain. "He is a good man," she said, her voice firm. "He saved me from the vultures gang." But the words seemed to have little effect. They looked at Noah, at his rugged, dangerous appearance, and they saw only a man who was an embodiment of the world they had chosen to leave behind. Noah finally spoke. "I am a bounty hunter," he said, his voice low and clear. "I brought in a man named the Vulture. Sarah was with him. The sheriff, he gave me a choice, a bag of gold or her. I chose her. And now the Vulture's gang is hunting us. They want Sarah and something she has." His words were a simple, unvarnished truth, but they hung in the air, a raw, brutal shock in a place of peace. The crowd murmured, their faces filled with a new kind of fear. The world they had chosen to shun was now at their doorstep. A young man, his face flushed with anger, spoke up in a thick accent. "You have brought a sickness here. You have brought violence and danger. You should not be here. You should leave now." The words were a direct challenge, and Noah felt a familiar tension coiled in his gut. He was used to confrontation, to threats, but this was different. This wasn't a man with a gun, it was a man with a righteous anger, an anger born of a deep need to protect his home and his people. Sarah stepped forward, her body a shield between Noah and the young man. "He is not a sickness," she said, her voice filled with a quiet passion. "He is a man who saved my life. He chose to protect me when he had no reason to. He is a good man." Her words seemed to quiet the young man, but the fear and suspicion remained in his eyes. The sun finally set and the families left, their faces still filled with a deep sense of unease. Noah and Sarah were left alone with Martha and her husband. The silence was thick with the weight of their unspoken words. Noah knew he was on trial here. He was a man of violence in a world of peace, a man of action in a world of faith, and he had a feeling that he would have to face a much bigger trial soon. The whispers of the past, of a man named Jacob, were about to become a loud, angry shout, and he had no idea how to prepare for it. The only thing he knew for sure was that he would not run. He had chosen this path, and he would see it through to the end. The morning was cold and damp, a fine mist hanging in the air like a shroud. The silence of the Amish farm was different now. It was no longer a peaceful quiet, but a tense, watchful stillness. The news of Sarah's return and the presence of the Englishman had spread through the small, isolated community like wildfire. A meeting had been called. The elders, the respected leaders of their people, would gather to decide their fate. Noah and Sarah were led to a large, unadorned meeting house, a simple wooden building with long benches. Inside, a dozen men and a few women sat in quiet deliberation. Their faces, weathered by a lifetime of hard work and faith, were serious and unyielding. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and a palpable sense of judgment. At the front of the room sat a man with a full white beard and a stern but wise face. He was the elder, the leader of their community. His name was Samuel. Sarah, with a bowed head, went to sit on a bench, her hands clasped in her lap. Noah stood behind her, his posture rigid. He was still armed, his rifle held in his hand, a symbol of everything they feared and everything they needed. The elders looked at him, their gazes filled with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Samuel, the elder, spoke first. His voice was a low, commanding rumble. "Sarah, you have been gone from us. You have been in the world, in a place of darkness and sorrow. We thank God for your safe return. But you have brought a man with you, a man of violence, a man with a gun. This is a great tribulation for us. We must know why. You must tell us everything." Sarah took a deep breath, and then slowly she began to tell her story. She spoke of the night she was taken, of the men who came to her father's house, of the journey she had been forced to take. She spoke of the Vulture and his gang. And then, She spoke of Noah. She spoke of his bravery, of his choice, of the kindness and the protection he had offered her. "He is not a man of evil," she said, her voice gaining a new strength. "He is a man who has shown me more kindness than many in our own community would have." The words were a quiet but firm rebuke, and a murmur went through the crowd. But she had not told them everything. The elder, with a deep sense of intuition, knew there was more. "And the men who are pursuing you?" he asked, his eyes fixed on hers. "They are not simply men who have lost a bounty. There is more to this. You must tell us the truth, Sarah, the whole truth." Sarah hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. The fear was back in her eyes, not the fear of being harmed, but the fear of bringing danger and shame to her people. But she knew she had to. This was no longer just about her and Noah. This was about the entire community. She looked up at Samuel, at his wise, unwavering eyes, and she knew she had to trust him. She reached into her dress and, with a trembling hand, took out the small, worn leather journal. "They are not after a bounty," she said, her voice now a firm, unwavering whisper. "They are after this. This is my father's journal. It is a record of our community, a record of the souls who have passed through here. And in this book, there is a record of a man who was once one of us. His name was Jacob." A gasp went through the room. The elder's face, which had been stern, was now a mask of shock and sorrow. The name, Jacob, was a ghost in their community, a secret they had tried to bury. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "He left us many years ago. He was a troubled soul. My father wrote of his departure in this journal. He wrote of his sins, of his brokenness. He wrote about his hope that one day he would return to us. The man who is hunting us now, he is not Sterling, he is Jacob. He is a ghost who is trying to erase his past. He wants to destroy this book. He wants to destroy the witness to his brokenness." The silence that followed was a heavy, suffocating thing. The elders looked at each other, their faces filled with a mix of disbelief, fear, and a profound sadness. A man named Jacob, a ghost from their past. The idea that one of their own had turned into such a man of violence and cruelty, was a deep personal wound to their community. They had not just been brought into a dangerous situation by an outsider, they had been brought into a war with one of their own, a war they were not prepared to fight. Samuel, the elder, finally spoke, his voice filled with a profound sorrow. "So, this man of violence, he is a son of our own community, a brother who has lost his way." He looked at Noah, his gaze now filled with a new, weary understanding. He was not just a bounty hunter now. He was a protector, an unlikely shield against a darkness that was both external and deeply internal. The other elders began to talk, their voices hushed and frantic. Some argued they should give Sarah and Noah up, that to risk the community for one soul was a great sin. Others argued that they had a duty to protect their own, no matter the cost. The community was divided. The choice was not just about two strangers. It was a test of their faith, a test of their commitment to their values. The question was no longer what to do. It was what to do with a man who was once one of their own, a man who had brought the world of violence to their doorstep, a man they were now being asked to fight. And the battle was not just for a book or for a life. It was for the very soul of their community. The debate among the elders was a quiet storm of conflicting principles and deep-seated fears. The room, which had been a place of serene contemplation, was now a cauldron of conflict. The air was thick with whispered arguments. Some elders, their faces grim, insisted they must give up Sarah and Noah to protect the rest of the community. "We are a people of peace," one elder said, his voice trembling with frustration. "We cannot engage in a war with a man of violence. It is against our very being. It is a sin." Others, however, held a different view. "She is one of our own," another elder countered, his voice firm, "and she is being pursued by a man who was once our own. To cast her out is to cast out a part of ourselves. To give her to him is to give in to evil. We cannot do that. Our faith demands that we protect the innocent." Noah, standing in the middle of the room, felt like he was in a courtroom, a man on trial. He was a witness, a defendant, and a pawn in a battle of wills that he could not fully comprehend. The language, the customs, the deep-seated faith of these people were a world away from his own. He was a man who solved problems with a gun. They were a people who solved problems with prayer. The two worlds were clashing, and he was the focal point of the collision. It was Sarah who finally spoke, her voice clear and strong. She stood up, her body a testament to a quiet courage that had grown with every step of their journey. "I ask you to listen," she said, her voice commanding a sudden, complete silence. "I have known Noah for only a short time. He is a man of violence, yes. He is a man with a gun, but he is also a man of honor. He chose to protect me when he had no reason to. He is not here to bring harm. He is here to bring me home. He is not the sickness. He is the cure. He is the one who has protected me from the darkness. You say that we cannot fight a man of violence, but what do we do when that man of violence comes to our doorstep?" She looked at the faces of the elders, her gaze filled with a profound and unyielding truth. "Our faith tells us that we must do good. It tells us that we must protect the innocent. This man, this Jacob, he has forgotten his way. He has forgotten his faith. He has become a hunter, a ghost of a man. We cannot simply turn our backs on him. We must face him, and we must do it with courage and with faith." She then turned to Noah, her eyes meeting his. "This man," she said, her voice filled with a quiet passion, "he has shown me a different kind of courage. The courage to choose the hard path, the courage to stand for what is right. We need that courage now. We need it to face the ghost of Jacob. We need it to protect our home." The words hung in the air, a powerful, raw testament to her faith in him. The elders were silent, their faces filled with a new kind of contemplation. They had been arguing about principles, about scripture, about what was right and what was wrong. But Sarah had reframed the debate. She had made it personal. She had made it a matter of courage and honor. Samuel, the elder, finally stood up. His voice, when he spoke, was filled with a new kind of authority. "Sarah is right," he said. "We cannot simply turn our backs on this. We have a duty to our own, and we have a duty to our faith. We cannot meet violence with violence. That is a sin. But we can meet it with a different kind of strength, with the strength of our community. We will not give up our daughter. We will not give up the book, but we will not take up arms. We will not become what he is." He looked at Noah, his gaze now filled with a new kind of respect. "You, young man," he said, "have brought us a great tribulation, but you have also brought us a great opportunity. We will not fight with you, but we will stand with you. We will be a shield of peace against his darkness. We will protect our home, not with guns, but with faith. And you will be our sword. You will be our protector. It is a great burden, but it is one you have chosen. Do you accept it?" Noah, who had spent his life running from responsibility, felt the weight of the question. He had chosen Sarah, but he had never expected to choose her community. He was a man who lived by his own rules, a loner, a man who relied on his own strength. But now he was being asked to become a part of something bigger than himself. He looked at Sarah, at the hope in her eyes, and he knew his answer. "I do," he said, his voice a low, firm promise. "I will protect you. I will protect this community. I will protect you from the ghost of Jacob." The words were a vow, a commitment that went far beyond a bounty. It was a promise to a people he barely knew, a promise of his protection and his loyalty. The test of faith had been passed, and a new, unlikely alliance had been forged, an alliance of a man of violence and a community of peace. The battle was coming, and they would face it together. The decision had been made, and the community of peace began to prepare for a war they refused to fight. It was a strange, silent preparation, a testament to their unwavering faith. They did not arm themselves. They did not gather weapons. Instead, they gathered together, their movements deliberate and filled with a quiet purpose. They began to fortify their homes, not with barricades, but with their presence. They moved their families closer together, their homes a shield of human connection against the coming storm. Noah, for his part, began to train them. It was a strange, awkward process. He taught the younger men how to handle themselves in a fight, how to use their hands to defend, not to attack. He showed them how to use the terrain to their advantage, how to use their knowledge of the land as a weapon. They were hesitant at first, their faces filled with a deep sense of unease. They were not men of violence, they were men of the earth, men of faith. But they trusted Sarah, they trusted her faith in Noah. And so they listened. Noah, in turn, began to learn from them. He was a man who had spent his life on the road, with no family, no home, no community. He had seen the worst of humanity, but here he was seeing a different side of the world. He was seeing a community that was bound together by a deep and abiding love for each other. He saw men and women working together, their hands calloused from a lifetime of labor, their faces filled with a quiet contentment. He saw a people who lived a life of humility, of simplicity, of profound faith. Sarah became his guide. She taught him about their way of life, about their values, about their history. She told him about the stories in the Bible that guided them, about the simple rules that governed their lives. She told him about her father's journal, a record of the community's joys and sorrows, a testament to their faith. He believed that every soul was worth saving, she said, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. He believed that a record of a man's brokenness was also a record of his potential for redemption. Noah, for his part, told her about his life. He spoke of the long, lonely nights, of the fear of failure, of the hollow feeling that came with a successful bounty. He spoke of the loneliness, of the lack of a home. She listened, her eyes filled with a deep, unsettling compassion. She understood a loneliness that was deeper than a lack of companionship. She understood a loneliness of the soul. Their conversations were a bridge between two worlds, a bridge of understanding that was being built, brick by brick, with every shared story, every quiet moment of contemplation. The air around them, which had been filled with a deep ingrained distrust, was now filled with a fragile but powerful sense of respect. They began to receive information from other Amish communities, small hushed whispers of a man named Sterling, a man with a dark past and an army of outlaws. They learned that he had been asking about Sarah, about her father, about the book. His network, they realized, was not a violent one. It was a network of information, of spies, of men who were willing to betray their own for a price. The Amish communities, with their simple, unassuming ways, were the perfect place for a man like Sterling to hide and gather information. The full weight of the situation settled on Noah. He was not just fighting an outlaw, he was fighting a ghost of a man who was using a network of betrayal and deceit to erase his own past. He was fighting a man who was willing to destroy a community to save himself. As the days turned into a week, the community finished their preparations. Their homes were ready, their families were together, they had faith, and they had Noah. He, in turn, had them. He had a purpose that went far beyond a bag of gold. He had a reason to fight. The unconventional alliance had been forged, an alliance of a man of violence and a community of peace, an alliance that was about to be put to the ultimate test. The air grew heavy with a sense of impending doom. The quiet, peaceful landscape felt different now, charged with a strange, nervous energy. Noah, his eyes scanning the horizon, saw the first sign of their pursuers. A small dust cloud, thin and far away, but moving with a deliberate, relentless purpose. They were coming. The battle was at hand. And for the first time in his life, Noah wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for a family he had never known, a family of faith and peace, a family that had placed their trust in him, a stranger with a gun. The dust cloud on the horizon was a slow, deliberate march of inevitability. It grew larger with every passing minute, a tangible, menacing presence in the otherwise serene landscape. Noah, perched on a rocky outcrop that gave him a clear view of the approaching trail, watched with a cold knot of dread in his stomach. The number of riders was larger than he had anticipated, at least a dozen men, maybe more. They rode in a tight, organized formation, not like a band of ragtag outlaws, but like a small professional army. Sterling had not come to negotiate. He had come to conquer. He watched as they neared, their figures becoming clearer. He could see their rifles, the grim determination on their faces. They were not just a group of men hired to do a job. They were a cult of violence, led by a man who was driven by a profound personal need to erase his past. Noah's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was one man. He had a single pistol and a rifle. He was outnumbered and outgunned. The Amish, with their faith and their non-violence, were a shield of peace. But what good was a shield of peace against an army of men with guns? He scrambled down from the outcrop, the rocks slipping under his boots. He ran back to the community, his lungs burning with the exertion. The news of the approaching riders had already spread. The air was filled with a quiet, terrified energy. The women were herding the children into the homes, their faces pale but their movements deliberate. The men, their hands still calloused from a lifetime of working the land, stood in a quiet, solemn formation in the center of the valley. Their faces were grim, but there was no panic, no hysteria, only a profound and quiet resolve. Noah found Sarah and the elder Samuel in the center of the crowd. He looked at them, his face filled with a desperate, raw fear. "There are more of them than I thought," he said, his voice ragged with emotion. "They're coming to kill, to destroy. We have to do something, we have to fight." Samuel's face, which had been a mask of quiet contemplation, was now filled with a profound and sad understanding. "We cannot," he said, his voice a low, firm whisper. "We cannot become like him. We cannot meet violence with violence. It is a sin." "But they'll kill you," Noah said, his voice rising in frustration. "They'll kill all of you." Sarah, her hand on his arm, her eyes filled with a deep, unsettling calm, spoke. "We trust in God, Noah. We trust in his plan. We will not take up arms. We will not run. We will stand here and we will face him with our faith." Her words were a stark, painful reminder of the chasm that existed between their worlds. He was a man of action, a man who believed that you fought for what you believed in. They were a people of faith, a people who believed that you trusted in God. He was their sword, and they were his shield. But a sword was useless without a hand to wield it. Noah felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He was their only line of defense. A lone man, a man of violence, against an army of men just like him. He looked at the faces of the children, their eyes wide with fear and a deep, unsettling curiosity. He looked at the faces of the women, their hands clasped in prayer. He looked at the faces of the men, their hands still at their sides, their faces filled with a quiet, terrifying resolve. They were all trusting him. They were all depending on him. He felt a sense of purpose that was deeper than any bounty, any money, any sense of honor he had ever known. He went to the edge of the valley, to a place where he could get a clear view of the approaching riders. He unholstered his pistol, checked his rifle. His hands, which had been trembling with fear, were now steady. He was a man of action, and the time for action had come. The sun was a low, smoldering ember on the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows across the valley. The air was thick with the scent of fear and the promise of bloodshed. The ghost of Jacob, a man who had once been one of them, was coming home, and Noah, a man who had chosen to protect a stranger, was about to face a battle that would either destroy him or save them all. He was no longer a bounty hunter. He was a protector. He was a sword of righteousness in a world of violence. And he would not fail. He would not run. He would fight for them, a people who refused to fight for themselves. He would be their shield, their sword, their hope. And he would not give up until his last breath. The roar of hooves echoed through the valley as Sterling and his men rode in. The contrast was stark, brutal even. The outlaws, with their dusty clothes, their weapons drawn, their faces grim and menacing, were a violent stain on the pristine landscape. They came to a halt in the center of the valley, their horses snorting and shifting. The Amish community, standing in a tight, quiet formation, was a picture of serene defiance, a wall of peace against a storm of violence. Sterling, the man who had once been Jacob, dismounted. He was a tall, lean man, his face a mask of cold, weary cruelty. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were filled with a profound and unsettling hatred. He was a man who had lost his way, and he was consumed by a desire to erase his past. He looked at the faces of the Amish, his gaze filled with a mocking contempt. "Well, well," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Look who it is, the lost sheep. I see you've found your way home, Sarah, and you've brought a dog with you. He looked at Noah, who stood at the front of the crowd, his rifle held loosely in his hand. A bounty hunter, a man of violence, a man with a price on his head, no doubt. Noah didn't speak. He simply watched, his mind racing. He was waiting for a sign, for a moment to strike. He was the only weapon they had, and he had to use himself wisely. Sterling's gaze returned to the elders. "I know why you have come here," he said, his voice filled with a chilling arrogance. "You have the book of lies, the book of my past. I want it, and I want the woman. You will give them to me, or I will burn this place to the ground. I will kill every man, woman, and child here. I will destroy every memory of this place. I will erase every single trace of my past." The elder, Samuel, stepped forward, his face filled with a quiet, unwavering dignity. "Jacob," he said, his voice a low, firm whisper, "you are our brother. You have lost your way. We offer you peace. We offer you forgiveness. We offer you a home. The book, it is not a book of lies. It is a book of truth. It is a record of our love for you, a record of our hope that one day you would return to us." The words, so gentle and so full of a profound truth, seemed to enrage Sterling. His face, which had been a mask of cold cruelty, now twisted in a vicious sneer. "Forgiveness?" he spat, the word filled with a bitter, raw hatred. "I don't want your forgiveness. I don't want your love. I want to forget. I want to forget this place. I want to forget the man I used to be, the man you wrote about in that book." He looked at Sarah, at the small leather journal clutched in her hand. "That book, it is a ghost. It is a ghost that is haunting me. I will not rest until I have destroyed it, and I will not rest until I have destroyed every memory of the man you call Jacob." He looked at his men. "Take them," he commanded, his voice filled with a terrible, chilling finality. "Take the woman, and if the book is not on her, find it, and if they resist, kill them." The men on horses began to move forward, their rifles raised. The Amish community, a quiet, unmoving wall of peace, stood their ground. They did not run. They did not scream. They did not take up arms. They simply stood there, their faces filled with a profound, terrifying calm. It was a test of faith, a test of their commitment to non-violence. And Noah, watching the men on horses move forward, knew that he was about to be put to the ultimate test. He was their only hope, their only sword. And he would not fail. He would not run. He would fight for them. He would fight for a people who refused to fight for themselves. The battle was coming, and it was not just a battle for a book or for a life. It was a battle for the very soul of a man who had lost his way. It was a battle between two worlds, a battle between violence and peace. And Noah was a man caught in the middle. The first bullet fired was a raw, visceral shock to the senses. It didn't hit anyone. It was meant as a warning, a taunt. But the sound, a sharp crack that echoed through the peaceful valley, was a brutal reminder of the world they were facing. The outlaws, spurred on by Sterling's command, rode forward, their faces twisted into masks of cold, grim determination. They were a torrent of violence, a stampede of cruelty. But the Amish did not move. They stood their ground, a wall of quiet, unmoving humanity. They did not scream. They did not run. They did not take up arms. They simply stood there, their hands clasped in prayer, their eyes filled with a profound and terrifying calm. The non-resistance was a weapon in itself. It threw the outlaws off their game. They were used to people fighting back, to people screaming and running. They were not used to people who simply stood there, their faith a shield against their violence. Noah, however, did not stand. He was their sword, their protector, and the time for action had come. He raised his rifle, and with a single practiced shot, he took down the horse of the man in the lead. The horse went down with a loud, terrified whinny, sending the man sprawling in the dirt. Noah did not hesitate. He fired again, a quick, precise shot that took down another horse. The men, their horses now spooked by the sounds of gunfire and the sight of their comrades falling, began to slow down. Noah was a one-man army. He moved with a grace and a speed that belied his weariness. He was no longer just a bounty hunter. He was a force of nature. He was a man fighting for something more than money, something more than his own life. He was fighting for a family he had never known, for a people who had placed their trust in him. He was fighting for a different kind of life, a life of peace and community that he had only just begun to understand. But he was outnumbered. Two men, seeing his movements, dismounted and began to close in on him, their rifles raised. Noah, seeing them, threw himself behind a large stone fence. The bullets came with a dull, thudding sound, chipping away at the stone. He was trapped. He was out of ammunition. He was at their mercy. Just as the men began to close in on him, two young Amish men, their faces grim, moved forward. They didn't have guns, they had their hands, and the lessons that Noah had taught them. They moved with a surprising speed, their movements a blur of practiced defense. They didn't fight back. They simply disarmed the men, using a quick, sharp motion to knock the rifles from their hands. The outlaws, confused and enraged, began to fight back. But the young Amish men, with a quiet, terrifying resolve, held them off. They were not fighting. They were simply defending. They were a shield of peace against a storm of violence. The outlaws, their plans thrown into chaos by the non-resistance of the Amish and the fierce defense of Noah, were unnerved. They were a band of violent men, used to a world of predictable rules. This was a world without rules, a world of faith and courage that they could not comprehend. Sterling, seeing his men falter, let out a roar of rage. He dismounted, his face a mask of profound and terrifying anger. He was not a man who was used to failure. He was a man who was used to getting what he wanted. He raised his rifle and fired, the shot a loud, echoing crack that hit a post beside Noah's head. "You'll never win," he screamed, his voice filled with a desperate, raw fury. "You can't fight me. You can't fight a man who has nothing to lose." Noah, his face grim, his body aching, stood up. He had no more bullets. He had no more tricks. He was a man with nothing left to lose. But he had Sarah. He had the Amish. He had a different kind of strength now, the strength of a community that had placed its trust in him. The battle was not over. It was about to enter its final defining stage, a battle between a man who had lost his way and a man who had just found his, a battle between a ghost and a man who had finally found a reason to live. The two worlds were about to collide, and only one would be left standing. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the raw, unadulterated tension of a battle that had just ended, but a war that had yet to be won. The outlaws, demoralized and confused by the Amish's unwavering peace and Noah's fierce defense, had retreated. They were a beaten lot, their swagger replaced by a grim, sullen defeat. They had come for a fight and they had found something they could not comprehend. Sterling, however, did not retreat. He stood in the middle of the valley, a lone, menacing figure, his rifle held loosely in his hand. His face, which had been a mask of rage, was now a portrait of a profound, cold fury. He looked at the Amish, at their quiet, unmoving presence, and he saw a world he had tried to escape, a world he had tried to destroy. He saw the ghosts of his past, the ghosts he had tried to erase. His gaze fell on Noah. The bounty hunter was injured, a deep gash on his arm, but he stood tall, his rifle empty, a defiant, unwavering presence. "You won't win," Sterling said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're a man of violence. You don't belong here. You don't belong with these people. They are weak. They are fools. They will only get you killed." Noah didn't respond. He simply looked at the man who was once Jacob, and he saw a profound and terrifying loneliness. He saw a man who was consumed by his own sins, a man who had lost his way. Sarah, her face filled with a quiet courage, stepped forward. She held the small, worn leather journal in her hands. She looked at Sterling, her eyes filled with a deep, unsettling compassion. "Jacob," she said, her voice a soft, gentle melody that was at odds with the violent world around them. "You do not need to do this. You can come home. We can forgive you. This book, it is not a record of your shame. It is a record of our hope. It is a record of our love for you." Sterling's face, which had been a mask of cruelty, now twisted into a vicious sneer. He raised his rifle, his hands shaking with a raw, unadulterated rage. He was a ghost, and he was being faced with the reality of his own brokenness. He couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle the kindness, the forgiveness, the love. He could only handle violence. "I am not Jacob," he screamed, the words a raw, broken plea. "Jacob is dead. He is a ghost, and I will destroy every memory of him." He took a step forward, his rifle aimed at Sarah. But before he could fire, Noah, with a sudden, desperate speed, launched himself at him. The two men collided with a raw physical violence, a final brutal dance of two worlds that could not coexist. They fell to the ground, a blur of fists and fury. Noah, with his wounds and his fatigue, was not a match for Sterling's raw, unadulterated strength. But he had something Sterling didn't have. He had a reason to fight. He was fighting for a world of peace, of faith, of community. He was fighting for a woman who had taught him a different kind of bravery. He fought with a desperate, raw fury, a fury born of love and loyalty. Sterling, in a final act of desperation, reached for his knife. But before he could, the young Amish men, the ones who had been trained to defend, not to fight, moved forward. They didn't use violence, they simply surrounded him, their quiet, unwavering presence a suffocating shield of peace. Sterling, a man who was used to fighting, was now surrounded by a people who refused to fight. He was a man of violence in a world of peace, and the two could not coexist. He was a ghost and he was being smothered by the living. He looked at Sarah, at her face, filled with a profound and unwavering compassion. He looked at the faces of the Amish, at their quiet, peaceful defiance. He looked at Noah, a man who had chosen to die for them. And in that moment, the ghost of Jacob was finally faced with the reality of his own sins, not from a book, but from the faces of the people he had tried to destroy. He had not just failed, he had been defeated, not by a gun, but by a different kind of strength, a strength of faith, of community, of a quiet, unyielding love. He let out a defeated, broken cry, a cry of a man who had lost everything, even his own soul. He stood up, his body trembling, and he looked at the faces of the people who had tried to save him. He saw no triumph in their eyes. He saw only sorrow. He saw only a profound and heartbreaking pity. He turned, and with a last, defeated look at the book in Sarah's hands, he mounted his horse and rode away. He was a man without a home, a man without a future, a ghost condemned to wander the world he had tried to destroy. The war was over. The ghost of Jacob was gone. And in the peaceful valley, a man and a woman, a bounty hunter and an Amish woman stood together, a testament to a different kind of bravery, a bravery of love and loyalty. The long journey was finally over, and a new one was about to begin. The dust of conflict settled slowly over the valley, but the palpable silence that followed was not one of defeat, but of profound collective relief. The air, once thick with the smell of gunpowder and the raw tension of fear, was now filled with the gentle sounds of a community coming to terms with their survival. Sterling and his men were a fading memory, a cruel storm that had passed, leaving behind a deep and unsettling quiet. The Amish, who had stood their ground with a quiet, unyielding courage, now moved with a new kind of purpose. They were not just survivors. They were victors, not by the strength of a sword, but by the power of their faith. In the center of it all, bruised and bleeding, stood Noah. His arm, where a stray bullet had grazed him, throbbed with a dull, insistent pain, and his body, pushed to its physical and emotional limits, felt like a stranger to him. He was a man who had faced death 100 times, but this time was different. He had not fought for a bounty, not for glory, but for a people who had trusted him with their lives. The victory was theirs, but the burden of the violence was his alone. He felt a profound weariness settle in his bones, a sense of exhaustion that went far deeper than his physical wounds. He stood there, a solitary figure in the middle of a crowd, a man who had fought a war for a people who believed in peace. It was Sarah who came to him first. Her face, which had been a mask of stoic resolve during the conflict, was now a portrait of tender concern. She moved with a purpose. Her hands, which had been clutching the leather journal, now reached for his arm. "Come," she said, her voice a low, gentle command. "You are hurt. We must tend to your wounds." She led him away from the crowd, her hand a warm, steady presence on his uninjured arm. The community parted for them, their faces a mix of profound gratitude and a newfound respect. They no longer saw a dangerous outsider. They saw a protector, a man who had, against all odds, chosen to stand with them. They went to the small, humble cabin he had been staying in. The air inside was still and calm, a welcome respite from the chaos outside. Sarah, with a quiet efficiency, began to tend to his arm. She cleaned the wound with water and a clean piece of cloth, her movements gentle and precise. Noah watched her, his mind reeling. He had been tended to by saloon girls and rough doctors, but he had never been cared for with such a tender, unassuming kindness. She was not just a woman who had been a burden, she was a healer, a soul who could tend to wounds both physical and emotional. "You saved us," she said, her voice a whisper as she wrapped a clean bandage around his arm. "You chose us. You fought for us. You are our hero, Noah." The word, so simple and yet so powerful, hung in the air between them. He was not a hero. He was a man who had done his job, a man who had simply chosen the right path. But her words, and the look in her eyes, told him that it was more than that. He had not just saved them from an enemy, he had saved them from the fear of their own helplessness. He looked at her face which was now filled with a quiet, profound affection. "You were just as brave, Sarah," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You stood your ground. You didn't run. You didn't give up the book. You faced him with a different kind of courage, the kind of courage I never knew existed." His words were a raw, unvarnished truth, a testament to the respect and admiration that had grown between them. The next few days were a blur of recovery. Noah's physical wounds began to heal, and with every passing day, the emotional wounds of a lifetime of loneliness began to close. The Amish community, which had been so wary of him, now welcomed him. The children who had once stared at him with fear now looked at him with a shy, curious awe. The men who had once held a deep, ingrained distrust now invited him to work with them in the fields. He found himself learning about their way of life, about their commitment to community, about the simple joys of a life lived in harmony with the land. He helped them rebuild the fences that had been broken in the skirmish. He helped them tend to the chickens and the goats. He worked with his hands, his muscles aching with a new kind of fatigue, a fatigue that was not born of violence but of purpose. He spent his evenings with Sarah. She would sit with him by the fire, her hands busy with mending clothes, and they would talk. She would tell him stories of her childhood, of the simple pleasures of a life lived in faith. He in turn would listen, his mind slowly unwinding from the constant vigilance of a lifetime of being on the run. He had a home now. He had a purpose. He had a community that had welcomed him, a community that had chosen to see him not as a man of violence, but as a man of courage. The reward he had chosen, a reward that had seemed like a foolish choice, had turned out to be a reward far greater than any bag of gold could have been. The peculiar choice he had made had led him to a place of peace, to a sense of belonging, to a feeling of being truly seen. The aftermath of peace was not just a cessation of violence, it was a profound, quiet healing. The days that followed the battle settled into a rhythm of quiet healing. The valley, a witness to a recent storm of violence, was now bathed in the warm, gentle light of a peaceful spring. Noah's physical wounds were mending steadily. The deep gash on his arm was closing, a reminder of the night he had stood as a lone shield against a torrent of hatred. But the true healing was happening elsewhere, in the quiet, unassuming moments that filled his days. He had become a part of the community, not as a visitor, but as a temporary resident. He spent his mornings working in the fields, his hands, once accustomed to the feel of a rifle and the cold steel of a pistol, now learning the rhythm of the plough and the subtle art of planting. The sun, a warm presence on his back, felt different here. It was not a source of heat and exhaustion, but a partner in a shared labor. The men of the community who had once looked at him with a wary suspicion now spoke to him with a quiet, respectful camaraderie. They taught him about the land, about the importance of patience, about the strength that came not from a single act of violence, but from a lifetime of quiet, persistent labor. In the afternoons he would sit with the elders, his mind, once a constant calculator of danger and odds, now filled with a deep and profound curiosity. They told him stories of their faith, of their history, of their commitment to a life of humility and simplicity. He found himself listening, truly listening, for the first time in his life. He was not just hearing their words, he was feeling the truth of them. The truth that there was a different way to live, a way that was not filled with fear and a constant struggle for survival, but a way that was filled with peace and a deep sense of belonging. He had a purpose now, a purpose that went far beyond a bounty. He was no longer running from a past. He was building a future. But the most profound healing was happening in the evenings, with Sarah. She would sit with him by the fire, her hands busy with knitting or mending, and their conversations would be a bridge between their two worlds. She spoke of her family, of her parents, of the love and the guidance that had shaped her into the woman she was. She told him about her quiet dreams, of a life of peace and a family of her own. He, in turn, spoke of his own past, of the loneliness he had carried for a lifetime, of the hollow feeling that came with a successful bounty. He confessed his fear, the fear that he would never be able to truly belong, that he was a man of violence in a world of peace. "You have found a home here, Noah," she said, her voice a soft, gentle melody. "You have found a purpose. The darkness, it is a part of you, but it does not define you. You have used your strength for good. You have used it to protect us. That is not a sin. That is a blessing." Her words were a balm to his soul, a deep, profound comfort that he had never known. She saw him not just as a man who had saved them, but as a man who was worthy of being saved. The bond between them grew with every passing day. It was a bond forged in the crucible of their shared journey, a bond of trust, of respect, and of a quiet, unspoken love. He had chosen her, and in doing so, he had chosen a life he never knew existed. She had trusted him, and in doing so she had found a protector, a partner, a man who saw her not as a burden, but as a woman of profound strength and a quiet courage. As the days turned into a week, Noah's physical wounds were almost fully healed. But his emotional journey was still just beginning. He was a man who had lived his life as a loner, as an outsider. He was now a man who was a part of something bigger than himself. He had a family. He had a home. He had a purpose. But the road ahead was not just about staying. It was about truly leaving the past behind. The reward money, the $1,000 in gold, still waited for him in the sheriff's office. It was a symbol of his old life, of his old purpose, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had to go back. He had to close the chapter on his old life. He had to face his past, not as a man of violence, but as a man who had found his own kind of bravery. The time for healing was over. The time for the final journey was about to begin. The air was filled with the promise of a new day, but Noah's heart was heavy with the weight of a difficult decision. He had found a home here. He had found a purpose. He had found a family. The easy choice, the comforting choice, would be to stay, to live a life of peace, to leave the past behind. But a deep-seated sense of honor, a promise he had made to himself long ago, pulled him in another direction. The reward for the vulture, a full $1,000 in gold, was still waiting for him in the sheriff's office. It was a tangible link to his old life, a symbol of a life he had lived by his own code. He had to go back. He had to fulfill his obligation. He had to truly close the chapter on his past before he could fully embrace his future. He found Sarah in the garden, her hands covered in soil, her face a picture of quiet contentment. He stood there for a moment watching her, a profound sense of love and gratitude swelling in his chest. She was not just a woman he had saved. She was a woman who had saved him. He took a deep breath. "Sarah," he said, his voice a little rough. She looked up, her face filled with a gentle, questioning kindness. I have to go." The words, so simple and yet so fraught with emotion, hung in the air between them. Her face, which had been a picture of quiet contentment, now clouded with a profound sadness. She didn't ask why. She knew. She had seen the same conflict in his eyes, the conflict between the man he was and the man he was meant to be. "The money," she said, her voice a low whisper. "You must go back for the money." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a testament to her deep and profound understanding of him. "I have to," he said, his voice filled with a desperate need for her to understand. "It's a promise I made to myself. It's the last piece of my old life. I have to go back and get it. I have to go back and face it, as a different man." Her eyes filled with a quiet, unsettling fear. "And you will come back?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "The world, it is a dangerous place, Noah. It is a place of temptation. It is a place of darkness." She was not just speaking of the physical dangers. She was speaking of the dangers of his own past, the dangers of a life that had been defined by violence and loneliness. He took her hands in his gaze unwavering. "I will come back," he said, the words a low, firm vow. "I am a different man now, Sarah. I have a purpose now. I have a home. I am coming back to you. I will not let the world take me." She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw a profound and terrifying trust. She believed him. She believed that he would return. And in that moment, the weight of his promise became a crushing burden. He was not just promising to return to her, he was promising to return to a different life, a life that he had only just begun to understand. He said his goodbyes to the community, to the men he had worked with, to the children who had looked at him with awe. The elder, Samuel, came to him, his face filled with a profound and wise understanding. "Go, young man," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "Go, face your past, and when you are ready, come home to us. Your home is here, your reward is here, your bravery. It is not in the violence you have shown, it is in the peace you have chosen." His words were a final blessing, a last piece of wisdom to carry with him on his journey. Noah mounted his horse, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He was leaving a home he had just found, for a past he had left behind. He was leaving a life of peace, for a final, difficult journey to a world of violence and chaos. The weight of his promise to Sarah, the weight of his promise to himself, was a heavy, constant presence in his heart. But he knew he had to do it. He had to truly leave his old life behind before he could fully embrace his new one. The journey was not just a physical one, it was a journey of the soul, and he was finally ready to face it. The world felt strange and alien now. The familiar dusty trail, once a constant companion, now felt like a foreign land. Noah rode with a quiet, grim purpose, his mind a million miles away. He passed by saloons and towns, their loud, chaotic energy a sharp, painful contrast to the quiet serenity of the Amish valley. The men he saw with their guns on their hips and their faces filled with a tired, weary cynicism looked like ghosts of his past. He had been one of them. He had lived their life. But he was a different man now, a man with a different purpose. He saw a small skirmish between two drunken men, a petty quarrel that would have once been a source of amusement. But now, all he saw was the raw, unthinking violence, the senseless anger, the utter lack of purpose. He rode on, his heart aching with a deep and profound sadness. He had seen a different way. He had seen a world where strength came not from violence, but from faith. A world where purpose was found not in a fight, but in a community. He reached the town, the same town where he had made his peculiar choice. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust and whiskey, a stark and brutal reminder of a life he had left behind. He rode to the sheriff's office, his body rigid with a sense of unease. He had a job to do. He had a promise to keep. Sheriff Jack O'Malley, the man who had offered him the peculiar choice, sat at his desk, his face a weathered mask of wisdom and kindness. He looked up as Noah entered, his eyes widening in surprise. "Noah," he said, his voice filled with a genuine, heartfelt relief. "I was beginning to think you had been lost to the territories. I was worried sick. What happened? Where have you been?" Noah, his voice low and a little rough, told him everything. He told him about the ambush, about Sarah's quiet courage, about the book, about the ghost of Jacob, and about the battle in the valley. He spoke of the Amish community, of their non-violence, of their profound faith. He spoke of the home he had found, of the purpose he had been given. The sheriff listened, his face a mask of astonishment and wonder. He was a man who had seen it all, but he had never heard a story like this. "Well, I'll be," he said, shaking his head in a mixture of disbelief and profound respect. A bounty hunter who chose a woman instead of $1,000, a bounty hunter who fought for a people who wouldn't fight for themselves, A bounty hunter who found a home. I've never heard a story like that. You're a different man, Noah. You're not the same man who walked out of this office. Noah nodded, his gaze fixed on the bag of gold on the sheriff's desk. It was still there, the reward for the vulture. The reward that had once been a symbol of his freedom, his purpose. But now it felt hollow. It felt meaningless. It felt like a ghost of a past life, a life he had left behind. "The money," he said, his voice filled with a profound sense of purpose. "I've come for the money." The sheriff nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. He pushed the bag of gold toward Noah. The sound of the coins was a siren's song, a song that had once filled him with a sense of triumph. But now it was a hollow, empty sound. Noah picked up the bag, its weight a heavy, constant presence in his hands. It was the end of a journey. It was the fulfillment of a promise. But it was not the end of his story. It was the end of a chapter, and the beginning of a new one. He was a man with a new purpose now, a man who had chosen a different kind of bravery. He was no longer a bounty hunter. He was a man with a home, a man with a family, a man with a profound and quiet sense of peace. The gold, once a symbol of his past, was about to become a symbol of his future, a future he had chosen with a quiet, uncompromising courage. The bag of gold sat on the sheriff's desk, a gleaming, unmoving testament to a past life. Noah looked at it, his face filled with a quiet, weary contemplation. The money, a bounty that had once been his ultimate goal, was now a meaningless burden. It was a symbol of a life he had left behind, a life of violence and loneliness. He was a different man now, a man with a different purpose, a man with a different kind of wealth. He looked at Sheriff Jack O'Malley, at his face, which was filled with a mix of respect and profound curiosity. The sheriff, a man who had seen it all, was now a witness to a story he could not comprehend. A story of a man who had chosen a life of peace over a fortune. Noah took a deep breath. "Sheriff," he said, his voice low and firm, "I can't take this." The words were a quiet, stunning admission. The sheriff's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean, son? It's yours. It's the reward for your bravery. You earned it." "My bravery," Noah said, a wry smile touching his lips, "was not in the bounty. It was in the choice. It was in choosing a different path. It was in choosing a different kind of reward." He looked at the bag of gold, a hollow, empty symbol of a past he was finally ready to leave behind. This doesn't belong to me. It belongs to a man who is no longer here, the man who was a bounty hunter." He pushed the bag of gold toward the sheriff. "I want you to do something with it," he said, his voice filled with a profound sense of purpose. "I want you to use it to help people, to help a community, to do something good with it, to honor the bravery of a people who believe in peace." The sheriff, his face filled with a mix of confusion and a deep, unsettling wonder, looked at him. You're giving it away, all of it, $1,000 in gold. For what?" "For a future," Noah said, his gaze unwavering. "For a different kind of life, for a life of peace and a home, for a different kind of bravery, the kind of bravery that comes from choosing a different path, the kind of bravery that comes from choosing a different kind of reward." The sheriff, a man who had seen his share of greed and violence, was a witness to a quiet, stunning act of generosity. He looked at Noah, not as a bounty hunter, not as a man of violence, but as a man of profound and unyielding courage. He had not just walked away from a fortune, he had walked toward a different kind of wealth. A wealth of love, of community, of purpose. "I'll be damned," the sheriff said, shaking his head in a mixture of disbelief and profound respect. "A different kind of bravery. I've never seen that before. You're a good man, Noah. A good man. I'll make sure it's used for good, I promise." Noah nodded, a quiet sense of peace settling over him. He had closed the chapter on his past. He had fulfilled his promise to himself, not by taking the reward, but by giving it away. He was no longer a bounty hunter. He was a man with a new purpose, a man with a new reward. He was a man with a home, a man with a family, a man with a profound and quiet sense of peace. He turned and walked out of the office, his back straight, his head held high. He was not a man who was running from a past. He was a man who was walking toward a future he had chosen with a quiet, uncompromising courage. The final journey was about to begin. The road back to the Amish Valley felt different. It was no longer a path of desperate flight, but a journey of profound purpose. Noah rode with a sense of anticipation that he had never known. The world, which had once felt so hollow and meaningless, was now filled with a quiet, profound beauty. The mountains, which had once been a source of danger and exhaustion, were now a beautiful, awe-inspiring presence. The sun, which had once been a relentless source of heat, was now a warm, comforting blanket. He was not a man who was running from a past. He was a man who was walking toward a future. He faced a few challenges on the way, a small group of drifters who tried to rob him, a flash flood that turned a small creek into a raging river, but he faced them with a new kind of strength, a strength that was not born of violence but of purpose. He did not fight the drifters. He simply rode past them, his quiet, unwavering presence a shield against their chaotic energy. He did not curse the flood. He simply waited, his patience a testament to the lessons he had learned. He was no longer a man with a gun. He was a man with a purpose. His hands, which had once been a source of violence, were now a source of peace. His mind, which had once been a constant calculator of danger, was now a source of quiet contemplation. He had found his strength not in a weapon, but in a community. He had found his purpose not in a fight, but in a home. As he neared the valley, his heart began to pound a frantic, happy rhythm in his chest. He was home. He was a long way from the dusty saloons and the dangerous trails. He was a long way from the life he had once lived. He was a man with a new purpose now, a man with a new home, a man with a new life. The peculiar choice he had made, a choice that had once seemed so foolish, had turned out to be the bravest choice he had ever made. He had chosen a life of peace over a life of violence. He had chosen a life of community over a life of loneliness. He had chosen a life of purpose over a life of meaninglessness. He rode into the valley, his body aching with fatigue, but his heart soaring with a profound sense of triumph. The sun was a low, smoldering ember on the horizon, casting long, peaceful shadows across the land. The sound of children playing, the smell of freshly baked bread, the sight of a community living in harmony. It was a profound and beautiful sight. He had not just come home, he had come to a different world, a world he had chosen with a quiet, uncompromising courage. He was a different man now, a man with a different purpose, a man with a different kind of bravery. He had not just found a home, he had found himself. He had not just found a family, he had found a soul. The final journey was over. The long, winding road had led him to a place of peace, to a place of quiet, simple beauty. The peculiar choice had led him to a reward far greater than any he could have ever imagined. He was home, and he was ready for the final, most beautiful chapter of his life. The sound of his horse's hooves on the dirt road was a familiar melody, but the feeling in Noah's heart was entirely new. He rode into the valley, the last rays of a setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. The sight was a balm to his soul, a final, beautiful testament to a journey that had been long and filled with a quiet, unyielding courage. The valley was not just a place on a map, it was a home. It was a place of peace, of love, of a profound and simple beauty. He rode toward the cabin, and as he neared, he saw her. Sarah, her face filled with a quiet, expectant hope, stood on the porch, her hands clasped in front of her. The sight of her, a beautiful, strong woman who had been a source of quiet courage and a wellspring of love, filled him with a profound and overwhelming sense of peace. He had come home. He had fulfilled his promise. He dismounted, his body weary from the journey, but his heart soaring with a profound and exhilarating sense of purpose. He walked toward her, his gaze unwavering. He had 1,000 words to say, 1,000 stories to tell. But in that moment all that mattered was the quiet, unspoken truth that passed between them. He was home. He was a different man now. He was a man who had chosen a different kind of bravery, a man who had chosen a different kind of reward. He reached her, and with a quiet reverence he put his hands on her face. Her eyes, filled with tears of profound relief and love, met his. "You came back," she whispered, her voice a low, emotional sound. "I promised," he said, his voice a low, firm vow. "I am home, Sarah. I am home." He had no gun now. His hands, which had once been a source of violence, were now calloused from a lifetime of hard work. He was a man who had chosen a different path, a man who had found his strength not in a weapon, but in a community. He sat with her on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley. He told her about the gold, about the sheriff, about the final, beautiful act of his old life. He told her about the man he had once been, a man who had no home, no family, no purpose. He told her about the man he was now, a man who had found his purpose, his family, his home. He had not just found a reward. He had found a quiet, profound sense of peace. He had been a bounty hunter, a man who had lived his life by a code of violence and solitude. But now he was a farmer, a man of peace, a man of community. He had not found wealth in gold, but in a quiet, unyielding love. The peculiar choice he had made, a choice that had once seemed so foolish, had been the bravest choice of his life. It had led him to a different kind of bravery, a bravery that was not in the fight, but in the choice. A bravery that was not in the bounty, but in the heart. A bravery that was not in the world, but in a small, quiet valley, a valley that was now, finally, his home. The story was over, but a new life had just begun.